You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
And I think the thing about change, and I'd done quite a bit of large-scale change before I got to Montfort, was, in my mind, you do it quickly. And people say, oh, it's too fast, we can't quite do it. But when you speak to people who've taken 2 or 3 years to implement something, they say, oh, we just wish we'd got on with it.
Hello, and welcome to the Times Higher Education podcast. I'm Eliza Compton, Interim Editor of Campus, Times Higher Education's platform for advice and best practice on all aspects of higher education. Written by and for academics and university professionals from across the globe. You'll find articles, videos, webinars, and of course podcast episodes at timeshighereducation.com/campus. I encourage you to check it out. We publish new resources every day, so there's always something to discover. And now on to today's episode. If this interview has a theme, it is leading by example and change management. My guest is Katie Normington, the vice-chancellor of Montfort University in Leicester in the UK, and a chief executive who has proved to be adept at both these key elements of leadership. Not only did she join the institution during COVID amid the longest lockdown in the country, a daunting enough task, in the 3 years she has led the institution, she has overseen large-scale curriculum reform. De Montfort has moved more than 80% of its courses from traditional curriculum structure to block plan, with significant boosts in student satisfaction. As you'll hear, the way that Katie talks about leadership demonstrates the very qualities she champions: clear strategic direction, communication, and empowering others to lean into their strengths. Indeed, she is a past winner of a Times Higher Education Leadership and Development Award. Our conversation covers her journey from aspiring ballet dancer to university head, breaking her own glass ceiling in the process, and why higher education needs bold leaders, courage, creativity, and agility as it faces global challenges. Hi, Katie, and welcome to the THE podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for asking me.
I am really looking forward to speaking to you about all things De Montfort and leadership. But before we get into the conversation, can you just give us a quick introduction of yourself and your position at De Montfort?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm the Vice-Chancellor and Chief Executive at De Montfort at Leicester. I've been there, I'm just into my 4th year now, and before that I spent a lot of my career at Royal Holloway, University of London. Kind of went in as a lecturer and came out as deputy principal, so it was quite a journey there.
Yes, I think I read that you joined Royal Holloway in 97 as a lecturer, and as you say, rose to being deputy principal of academic. When did your ambitions start to include leadership?
In a sense, I'm not sure that it was a kind of planned journey like that. There was only a very later point where I thought, well, maybe I should give this a full run and see if I can make it to the top. But I tried, I worked in further education before I went into higher education. And in my 20s, I was put in charge of a team of about 10 people running a performing arts degree and things like, it was A-levels and BTECs and things. I wouldn't say that was a brilliant experience. I mean, I was sort of put in charge because I suppose people must have seen something in me, but it was quite difficult. I was managing people who were quite a bit older than me. And to be honest, quite a lot of them were men, and they didn't particularly like that this young woman was there. And they tried to make my life as difficult as they possibly could. So I found it really stressful. And I did that for a few years and then actually did a PhD, went into the university sector, first of all at Greenwich and then Royal Holloway. And at Royal Holloway, I think, first of all, I was given the sort of master's programs to look after in a bit, and then more master's programs until I sort of had all of them. And then, sort of reshaped those, started some new ones. And people sort of then said, oh, well, look, the head of department's going to be away for a year. They're looking for someone to sort of fill in. What about you? And I took that on. And it was a great year. I mean, it was kind of like I found my feet. I mean, I really enjoyed teaching. My research was sort of reasonable, but I guess I sort of found the thing that I could do quite well. So then actually when the permanent job came up for head of department, I took that on. When the dean job came up, I kind of thought, oh, do I go for that? But I think, and so on, and so it went on. But I think each time I sort of felt, yeah, I've probably actually reached my own glass ceiling now. I probably can't really do much more than that. And was aware going into all of those roles, like it seemed like a big step up. And then you'd sort of think, oh, okay, I've maybe got the hang of this. I maybe can do a bit more. And I think it's just always come from that desire to make things better, to sort of look at situations and think, actually, I think there's a way of improving this for students, for staff, and wanting to do that. And that's where it came from. And I guess really just that sense of trying to be a vice chancellor only probably happened few years before I did. And I thought, okay, well, look, I either stay as a deputy for the rest of my career, but I've got quite a long way to go. Or I suppose I leave and do something entirely different. It didn't seem really possible at that point to sort of go back to being a professor and researcher. I'd been out of it for so long. Or I give it a go and I, see if I can, get to the top job, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there something about being an acting or an interim in these positions that gives you a bit of a stepping stone into thinking of yourself perhaps differently in terms of leadership?
I think so. So as I say, that kind of interim acting head of department gave me a sort of way in, but I think it's also how people then deal with those roles. So either you take the attitude, which is, well, look, I'm just an infill and I'll just literally sort of manage it, but not do anything. And I don't think that's a great way of approaching it. Or you say, look, I'm a interim for a year, but I am going to, do it the way that I think it needs to be done without creating sort of chaos in terms of moving everyone for a year and then moving it away, but thinking about how can I nudge things forward in a direction in a year, which when, the post holder comes back or someone else takes over, will still want that to happen, but you've moved things on. And I very much took that proactive attitude. So I think sometimes interims are probably, not that helpful as an experience, but I think you can make them into an experience that's really helpful.
That's really interesting advice. You joined de Montfort during lockdown, I believe, in 2021. This sounds like a daunting thing to walking into a big job amid a very, very strange circumstance. Can you set the scene a bit for us about that, about when you first began, about how you felt, about what the campus was like when you first joined?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'd also applied before COVID had hit. I mean, it was just starting to be a kind of rumor, and you saw a few bits of the world hit it. But at that point, I'm not sure any of us thought it was really going to become what it became. So I applied before any of that had happened. But then the sort of process of application just had to slow down, and lots of things went online. And then, it took about 6 months because they just kept saying, well, we can't really move it forward because we want to do it in person and we can't yet. I think what's worth remembering is that Leicester as a city was the worst affected city in the UK. So it had the longest lockdown. So I joined, and I'll always remember the day, January the 4th, 2021. I was on site and I did always go onto site 3 days a week, but I then sat doing almost all the meetings in my office online. But I felt it was really important for people to see me on campus, but also to be able to tell people what it was like on campus, because a lot of them weren't. So that was sort of quite important for me. But the end of that first day, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, announced that we'd be going into a second lockdown. And the way it was said, you could tell it was a really long lockdown. It was going to be months. So the beginning of day 2 was setting up kind of COBRA emergency meetings online with my senior team, who I'd only sort of met the day before. I mean, I've done some prep meetings, but it was kind of like that. And I had to say, this is going to last a while. We need to close down quite a lot of our campus because it's only probable that we will get our health students back to teach and the rest of the students will be online. And we can't be running a massive campus for 20,000 students when we've got about 3,000 students here. So it was very odd that the first thing I had to do was shut down most of the university. And it's never the thing that I'd have planned. But then also there was a bit of resistance to closing some of the buildings, saying, well, so-and-so needs to get in there. And I said, look, we can provide places for people to work, but we can't keep a whole massive building open for one person to get into their office. I said, in actual fact, I don't know why we're keeping open the building I'm in. There's only about 4 of us that come in. I think close this building, move me somewhere else. And of course, once I'd said that, no one could backtrack and say, well, I want to keep my building open. And I think it it maybe set that tone that I was going to lead from the front, but also not expect people to do the things that I wouldn't also be willing to do. But yeah, it was, I started in January, it was May till we actually got a team meeting in person, and we were starting to work on a new strategy, and it got to the point where we needed a strategy away day. We'd done all the work we could do with online consultations with staff, students, key partners, things like that. We'd built this whole picture bottom up, which I was very keen to do, but we needed to start then sifting through that material. And I was like, we needed an away day. And I said, we can't have an away day online. By that point, you were allowed to sort of go to restaurants under certain conditions. And I said, we're just going to treat the place like a restaurant. Tables will be like that, same mask wearing rules, etc. So we did manage to get a very strange day together. But as I said, that was nearly 6 months after starting there. So it really felt like about the first 18 months was still a lot about sorting out COVID, coming out of it. So although I've been there over 3 years, it feels like maybe I've only been there much shorter time, because actually so much of it was in quite a strange place.
I think I remember I have read you said something about the fact that COVID, though, gave you an opportunity to connect with people in a different way. Did you have very large online meetings to try and get a sense of the campus when you first joined?
Yeah, so absolutely. I said one of the first, I think it's what all vice-chancellors probably try to do, but it's to kind of go out and meet people and do what I was calling listening sessions. And I set them up. They're online. I think there were about 42 of them, but we went into every school and professional services, but where there were large departments or large professional services, setups, we offered often 3 meetings, so it weren't too many people in them. And because it was online, it was, I guess easy for people to sort of get to them. So and I asked a kind of series of questions, which is, what do you think is great about working at DMU? What do you think is the sort of core of what we do? What is it that you would like me to change? What was it that you'd absolutely like me not to change? And where would you see us in sort of 3 years' time? And, got some really helpful feedback from that. I think there was less clarity about where they saw us going in 3 years' time, but I guess that's the bit that, me and the senior team were able to draw together from some of the other bits that had been said.
In an interview, you talked about yourself as a leader with an ability to get people to work differently, I think was the phrasing that you used. You've mentioned, or you've alluded a little bit to your leadership style, but what do you mean by the work differently?
Yeah, I think, what I like to do is to work in a very matrix type of way, so that I notice if we're doing like sub-projects or things like that, I'll usually put 2 people from my team onto things together. So I'm expecting them to work in a way that crosses and overlaps between their portfolios in a particular way. And I know, I think the team have got used to it now. I think at the beginning, and I've got a very sort of new team, recruited a lot of it around me, but people would come in and sort of go, oh, okay. But it has meant that I think we've got a very good sense of connectivity between us, and a good understanding of people's sort of areas and portfolios. But actually, it's interesting you'd mentioned you might raise that question, and I thought, well, I know there's that, but I don't know what it feels like to be working with me. So I did drop a couple of notes to some people and said, why is it different working with me? And actually, what they came back saying was, you've got such a clear focus on strategic direction. So we set up, our strategy has set us up as the empowering university, so empowering students, staff and key partners to create a fairer society, which we can't do alone, obviously, but it's about making sure everyone can fulfill their potential wherever they've come from, whatever skills they've got on their background. But one of my team said, actually, what you do is you're fairly fearless, not in a rash way, but it means that you open up a space for us to be able to do our work in the ways we want to, and you don't mind us doing that. You find people's strengths and you really play to it. You kind of seem to, without ever telling us what our weaknesses are, steer us away from it and get us to play to our strengths. I guess the other thing they said is that they haven't always found is that I'm very good at listening to the institution and understanding what's meant, and also listening to people and understanding where they're trying to come from. But people have said to me before that I'm sort of fearless. I sort of think, well, I'm not. I am fearful of many things, but I guess my sort of attitude is one has to be bold and courageous. And I think particularly the time that higher education is finding itself in, not only in the UK but globally, it's really that time to be courageous because you have to find out the new, you have to be really canny about how you're working and where you're trying to take things.
Well, speaking of being courageous, this sounds like a good moment to introduce one of the big things I think that you've done at De Montfort, which is to bring in the block model. First of all, can you give listeners who are not familiar with block planning what it means, and then tell us a bit about what it was that appeals to you about this way of curriculum or this mode of curriculum design?
Yeah, absolutely. So the block as we do it is that instead of doing maybe sort of 3 or 4 modules concurrently, you do one block and then you move on to the next. Now we teach ours in 7-week blocks. So they're taught for 6 weeks, they're assessed and examined in the 7th week. They then get a block break usually. There are other models around the world that do it in smaller pieces than that. And the model we particularly looked at was Victoria University in Australia, who have done it large scale. But I do think we're the first UK university to do it large scale. There are others who do it in some disciplines or some parts of the programme, but we've pretty much got it now into every single programme. I mean, the reason we did it is that I kind of was very attracted to it a few years ago when I read about it. And the thing that I thought was good about it was that, as I said, you are assessed after sort of 6 weeks, and then you get your results there for a few weeks after that, which it meant that for students, you're getting credit in the bag and you're understanding how you're doing quite quickly. I got quite concerned about the fact that a student comes in September, October, probably then, depending on your setup, but wouldn't get necessarily a lot of marks back or finish a kind of unit till February, or might not even finish a whole unit till the summer. And that's a long time to go, not really fully knowing quite how you're getting on. Particularly, I felt for our sort of students where, as I said, we're trying to encourage people's potential, but it might mean that they come in, therefore, not particularly confident. Now, it's funny because I'd read a lot of block, was really keen on it a few years ago. And then when I got to De Montfort, to be honest, the student experience and the data around that were pretty poor. And I sort of said, look, we actually have to do something. And I did say to the board, this isn't an action plan. This is beyond that. We actually need to think about how we sort of restart. And I said that to my deputy at the time, Professor Andy Collop, who's now the VC at Hartbury University and College. And he sort of got a little group together and they came back and said, what about block? So I hadn't said block. And I said, that's so funny you should say it, because it's something that I had, very much had in my scope over the last few years, but, haven't kind of, thought about bringing that forward. And so it kind of then tied in the research and knowledge I had about it. It tied in massively with the students that we get, because I think we're very aware that they've got complex lives. A lot of them are working. Many will be maybe caring. There's a lot commuting. 40% of our students are commuting. And that sense of just being able to focus on one thing at once, they all speak about it really helping them. So we've been doing a lot of surveys, and something like 90% say they much prefer that way. But also we've watched our internal data go up by about 10%. So they're about 10% more satisfied with the teaching and their general experience on block than those students not on block. So it's been a tremendous success. But that sort of large scale change, and it was pretty large scale. Academic board took the decision to do block in October. By the following September, we'd got about 60% of our programs onto it, which had meant revalidating all of those, contacting students who might have applied under the old program to tell them what the new one would look like, etc. So it was a massive piece of institutional work. And then for the following year, we've got, as I say, almost everything onto it now. There's, I think, probably a couple of programs that needed professional body accreditation that I'm still working on that, but it's going in that direction now. So it was huge. And I'm really proud of the institution that we've done that. And people say, I don't know how that was possible in that time. And I think the thing about change, and I'd done quite a bit of large scale change before I got to De Montfort, was, in my mind, you do it quickly. And people say, oh, it's too fast, we can't quite do it. But when you speak to people who've taken 2 or 3 years to implement something, they say, oh, we just wish we'd got on with it. And I think the thing of putting people through change forever. But, as I say, change isn't easy. And I really appreciate and salute my staff who've been able to do that, both academic and professional service, who've been able to do that. And I do talk now about the fact that it gives me a huge confidence in the institution to bring about the sort of change and agility that's needed by the sector at the moment. And that's a massive card that we've got, which, as I say, I'm really proud, and I think it'll take us a long way in the future.
Kind of proof that it works, proof that these things are possible. I mean, something I think perhaps that did also come out of COVID, strangely enough, that large changes that many sectors had said were impossible, such as working from home, suddenly became possible because they absolutely had to be.
Right, you're absolutely right on that. And I think, often we're told that the HE sector isn't a good sector for changing quickly, but, in about a period of 4 days, everyone pivoted from face-to-face to kind of fully online. And if anyone had said, could universities do that? We'd have all said, no, it's not possible. We need, at least a kind of year to do that. So, as you absolutely point out correctly, that is a great testament, I think, to the sector.
Yeah, I think the sector has proved itself to be way more agile than its public image previously would have suggested. It's very inspiring to see so many of these changes happening. De Montfort has quite a lot of work, does quite a lot of work on equality, levelling up, as we say in the UK, but also incubating startups and encouraging entrepreneurialism. How do you think leadership influences an institution's environment when it comes to these sorts of cultural, environmental pieces of the puzzle, for want of a better way to express it?
Yeah, thank you. So, one of the things that drew me to De Montfort was both the diversity of the city and of it as a university and the work that it was doing around that. When I got there, it had already been running for a number of years. It was a great programme, particularly one called Decolonising DMU, which, of course, Shika Patel led. And that led to us being the first university to get the Race Equality Charter Silver mark. Mm-hmm. In the UK. That work was all going on when I got there, and it's a great thing. I think in terms of supporting it as a leader, we've done a few things, but not just myself, but the team as well, which is really important. First of all, it's not only, equality is one of the cross-cutting themes of our new strategic plan, but it's also embedded into the 4 pillars of that plan as well. So it kind of is sort of there, so we can live and breathe it. I ran a great program at Royal Holloway, which was taking associate professors, readers, very experienced senior lecturers through a program of workshops to enable them to apply for professorship in the future, and was very pleased to get a Times Higher Award for leadership for that. But I brought the program as well to De Montfort, and I think that leading from the front has been great. But we've also now brought in a thing that my Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education is Education and Equalities, but also we make sure on the top team that we are all champions as well for different staff networks. We've got 4 brilliant networks which cover a lot of issues to do with equality. And I think we make sure that we are visible and supporting. I don't know that you can ever do enough, but it's a huge part of who we are and what we're doing. And another point is that when we redesigned our curriculum for block, there were a few things we said, can you particularly look at? And one was equality, another sustainability, another sort of entrepreneurship and employability. So try to get that into the sort of student curriculum as well, so they're aware of it. I think what sort of has come out of that, you're talking a bit about that sort of entrepreneurial mindset. I suppose I thought when I got to the institution anyway, that it was a very sort of can-do type of place. And I talk very much about, look, we are a can-do place. And I guess that makes people think they can do. But more, I think there's also something about the kind of DNA of an institution. So De Montfort started as Leicester School of Art in the 1870s. And I kind of like to sort of say, well, that creativity has come down through us. And it's there very much, obviously, in the ways that we've got a strong portfolio of creative performing arts. But I think also in a lot of the ways that other people will approach things on campus. So I talk quite a lot about, it's in our genetics that we should be doing this. And you're right, we're in the top 10 for the number of graduate startups for universities by the HEPSI data. So 4th year running of that. A lot of that is creative industry students who'll be going to do their own solo trade and things like that. So it's that kind of creative entrepreneurship that comes through it. But we've also got a good program. We run a good lab with Barclays, a Barclays Eagle Lab as well around those startups. And we've got a great team that help do enterprise with students. So, the sort of support is there, but I think we also tend to get a lot of students who have had to fight their way to kind of get to university. It hasn't come easily. And I think with that gives them a sort of resilience and determination to get on and do the things that they want to do. And I think that probably also helps us breed that kind of mindset of, I'm going to give this a go and this is what I'm wanting to now do.
Well, mentioning creativity and resilience leads me quite neatly to my next question. As a younger person, you were an aspiring ballet dancer and trained in theatre. And I wanted to ask you what your early experience of training in the arts has taught you about resilience and persistence.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, my sort of girlhood dream was to be a ballet dancer. I did go to professional ballet school when I was so 16, 17 in London. And I mean, it's just tough. I mean, you talk to any dancer, it's just really tough. I'd like to think the environment changed a bit, but certainly at that stage, you would go into classes every day and just either be ignored or just be told that you had to sort this out or that was bad, or, so you had a kind of year of being told, that all those things. It does just make you really resilient. And it's also an environment where, you're fairly exposed. It's like, you're just there in your sort of leotard and tights trying to do it. Like there's nothing to hide. You can't sort of like sit at the back of the class and do something because that doesn't sort of quite work as the way it's set up. So, you are very much kind of on the line, but I do think it makes you really determined to be able to get up each day and go back and do that. I mean, I sort of talked a bit like it's doing national service maybe, but I mean, it's kind of how it felt was going through that. I mean, they did say partway through, look, we don't think this is for you. It's not going to work. You're not going to ever kind of get very far. And it's from there that I went then and did a drama and English degree at Exeter University, and then really got a kind of taste for being a theatre director, and did do quite a little bits of that. Got a master's in it, worked in fringe sort of companies in the UK, set up my own fringe company as well. And I think that directing piece has given me, it took me ages to realise it had given me something which was actually a sort of training in thinking about, if you're putting a play on, you have to have a vision for it, which is like having a strategy. You have to kind of get the best out of your team because those are the actors who are going on to represent you. And there's no point kind of saying, well, you're not very good at that. You kind of just get them into the right place, the right performance to make sure you're getting the best of them. And you have to get it ready for opening night. You can't say, well, don't worry, we'll just a couple of weeks late on this. You've got an audience there. So I think some of those sort of skills, and it's all about that group work in a room. I think some of those skills have sort of stood me in good stead, actually, for being a chief executive and a vice-chancellor. But it took me a long time to realise, in a sense, I'd been trained in some of those things, which is why that thing about coming up with a vision, communicating it, getting people on board, working with them in the best way you can, was the preparation I'd had.
Speaking of getting people on board, I just want to swing back quickly to your time at Royal Holloway. I did read a story that when you left Royal Holloway, you got flowers and a card from all the women that you'd supported during your time there. And I found this an incredibly moving story. Would you be able to share it with us about what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly moving to get that, but yeah, literally a bunch of flowers. And I was leaving in COVID as well, remember? So
yes,
it
of
was
course,
quite difficult to do things, but it was even better than that. It was a bunch of flowers, a card, and an invite to do a sort of little online leaving thing with a bag that had arrived. And it was all around me opening a little gift, and then there'd be someone else would tell a little story about whatever. I mean, it was just so great. And I think a lot of those women were women who had done my women's program. And not only had they then achieved a professorship, but for some reason or other, they'd also then taken on leadership roles. And it was a thing that I hadn't realised would come out of that programme, but actually had given people, I don't know, the confidence, the desire, certainly the realisation they had the skills to do it. And so, that was great. And, I think people, I mean, I'm now in an environment where the majority of the senior team are women, but not all senior teams are like that. And it's always, I find it very humbling, actually. Someone said it the other day at Montfort, but, I've got kids, I was a single parent, and people sort of say it's great that you role model that sort of thing. But you know, you never feel like a role model. You just feel like you're trying to keep all the balls in the air and do the best you can. But I do accept that, you know, for people seeing other people in those roles, that hopefully it shows them that it's possible too. So it was lovely to get that as a farewell in COVID from women at Royal Holloway.
Yeah, I really love that story. This seems like a good way to lead into my final question. In terms of supporting other people, offering paths, if you could offer some advice to your younger self at any point in your career, what would you tell her?
Yeah, thanks. I think to have more confidence. I think it took me a while to gain that, to realize that I probably, you know, was more than averagely good at doing some of the leadership roles, and therefore I should have the confidence to take that further. I think that was definitely one. I think, and I do talk about this really openly, which is, you know, it's very easy to look. I always felt it was easy to look at people who had, you know, outwardly were this sort of success. They'd got to a really senior role and go, it's all right for them. Then it obviously all went okay for them. And it doesn't. And I very openly talk about the fact that not everything went my way. You know, there were jobs I didn't get along the way. It didn't just all sort of happen. And that, I guess it goes back to that persevering. I wouldn't have to tell myself that. You know, we've talked a bit about how I got that, maybe from the ballet dancing and you know, maybe just from that sort of sense of being able to try to make things better as a leader, that's made me want to pursue that. So it is about persevering. People always take on setbacks. I guess I was all right at that bit, but I think it was certainly the sort of confidence of you know, realizing that I had probably more ability than I sort of thought I had at that time.
Believing that when people offered you these leadership roles and believed you could step into them, that actually you could. Sometimes it's hard to see ourselves as other people see us, I think.
Yeah, I was having a great conversation yesterday. I do a thing called Tea with a VC, and I was with a group of staff just talking about caring responsibilities and how to balance it with work. And, you know, we were talking about that thing about you can sometimes talk yourself out of going for something because you know all the reasons why it'll be difficult. And I said, actually, you know, that's the bit that I have to keep saying to people, put that aside for a minute, think about how you would do the role and what we'd like, and now think about how would you work away around some of the issues of childcare or stuff that you would need to sort out to do it. But don't start from the point of saying I can't do that because of so and so. And we had an interesting conversation around that. But yeah.
That is brilliant advice. I'm going to put that in my pocket and take it away. Thank you so much for your time today, Katie. I've really enjoyed speaking to you and have learnt a lot about leadership and leading from the front. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks ever so much.
Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you have feedback or ideas about topics or guests you'd like us to cover or speak to, please drop me a line at eliza.compton@timeshighereducation.com. I'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.